Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Chairs, and good morning, everyone. If anyone wondered, with all the research going on social ecological systems, and you wonder what the science policy interface looks like, this is it. You're sitting with both bosses on either side of me here, and I can tell you it's not very comfortable. But actually, just before I jump into the items on the report, I thought it was also might be just worth commenting you a little bit about some of the statements made earlier. The fact that the science program came out of CalFed, and for those folks who were not involved in or observing that massive change, I think it's the kind of thing that can only really happen in California. Here there was a program set up very intentionally as a 10-year experiment. And at the end of that 10 years, there was a number of very rigorous independent reviews of what was good and what was bad about that program. So the program takes a lot of criticism, but I think what was learned during the CalFed program, and then what was glossed over, was really a 2-year planning effort. What can we learn from that? What did the little Hoover Commission say? What did the national academies say about that? And then what was learned, that wisdom really rolled into the creation of the council itself. And so you're looking at this, the role of the council, how it's interfacing with science, how science is one of the fundamental pillars beneath the council's mission. I think is truly an experiment in itself. And I can tell you, and I know many of the science board members, you are literally all over the world and all over the US in similar programs, and you are being looked at very, very closely. Because this, what we refer to as the co-equal goals, when you're in the ultimate democracy in the world, this is an incredibly difficult thing to achieve. How do you balance these different societal values? How do you actually use science in making those decisions? So I think it is an extremely exciting time, and then just the history of the science program, the independent science board. Again, this has been used as a model throughout the US and even beyond in how the independent science board functions. So I think it does really work. The other comment I would make is I couldn't help but smiling when you were going around the table introducing yourselves, and the amount of modesty on this table is really quite extraordinary. I'd hoped one of the things we would have heard was just some of the really global issues where the folks around the table are engaged in. Dr. Norgaard's heavy involvement in the Millennium Assessment, his activities for the United Nations. And then I'm going to also pick on Dr. Fernando here, and there's an international professional journal on water and the environment. And on the front page of that, they choose a very wise sage, and they sit down and they grill that person. And it's right in the front page of the issue. And so yesterday, this version arrived on my desk, and there's Dr. Fernando right in the front page. And so I just pick out a couple of things here. What they were quizzing Dr. Fernando about was climate change and its perceptions.
Where's the information from that? Because I'm getting the ratio.
Okay, perhaps someone who's calling in, maybe you could just have your mic on mute. We're getting a little bit of feedback. But in that article that I think we'll send out is very interesting. Dr. Fernando, I didn't realize you'd been asked by the United Nations to host a workshop looking at the effect of climate change on both human health and global water security, and the potential political ramifications when you get water shortages across border issues. So that's probably pretty good training for what's going on in California right now. So
you've gone off to Egypt now to mediate the dispute with Sudan and prevent war.
So anyway, I thought I would just point that out, and I think it's all there on the web. And if you haven't done so, just to take a look at the different folks' short biographies, and it's really why I think if this is an experiment, why there's an extremely high chance of success in this particular program. Yeah, I was also drawn to remembering Chair Eisenberg's comments in the Netherlands a few years ago about, what was the title of it, or your introduction about how scientists and policymakers live in two totally different worlds and don't try and merge the two.
It sounds like something I might have said.
Well, I don't know if you were there, Joe, but people still talk about that. Anyway, that was just a few introductory remarks. So in the lead scientist report, this time I was just going to highlight a few things that Mr. Knopp mentioned earlier. The first issue was the biennial State of the San Francisco Estuary Conference. For those of you who aren't familiar, there is alternating conferences in odd and even years. In the even years, we have the State of Delta Science Conference, which the Delta Science program helps lead. And then in the other part, the odd years, there's the San Francisco Estuary Conference, which is led by the people on the estuary. But the idea is to bring the two science communities together. These conferences, this time around, it was close to 1,000 delegates. We've had up to 1,200 people in the past, so that it's extremely well attended. And what's curious that it's not just the scientists that come there. You actually look around. I'm not sure if we had any council members there this year, but Dr. Meyer was there, which was great, and Dr. Lund, I'll mention it in a moment, as he gave one of his typical presentations. But it really is a tremendous opportunity, and one of the trends that's been happening in the last couple of years is to ensure that these conferences link directly with the contemporary issues of the time. So it's an opportunity for the science community to get together and to really exchange ideas with policymakers and managers, and I think it was extraordinarily successful this year. So the theme of this focused around the 20th anniversary of the Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan for the Estuary, which also includes the 5 Delta counties. A few things that Mr. Knopp participated in a panel discussion on the cooperation amongst the many plans affecting the Bay Delta system, and there was some very interesting discussion, I think, on that panel. So it isn't death by PowerPoint that these conferences are moving much more to active interchange with both the audience and between speakers. A second this year, Dr. Lund gave an invited talk on managing the Delta ecosystem adaptively. It was a wonderful talk. It was typical Dr. Lund. And I think there was probably more spirited discussion with some of the points that you raised there in terms of an open exchange. So, a great talk, and you certainly engaged a lot of folks on that topic. The third thing is you'll see in an appendix, you as part of the Science Fellows, the Sea Grant State Fellows that the Council fund, you'd asked us to do several things with that program. And out of that came a very structured mentoring plan. So when we fund these young scientists, we want them to understand the context of their research, we want them to be engaged in agencies, and we also want them to engage in the broader science community. So one of the things we ask is that these fellows actually present and attend the science conferences. So you'll see the list of poster presentations that were given by the science fellows at the meeting. And let's see, the agenda was there on the webpage. You can go to there, but I don't know if Dr. Meyer or Dr. Lund, did you have anything to add? Just your perspectives. Thanks for being there. I know it was an effort to come down, but I think your comments and engagement was well worthwhile. The second item on here, we'll be talking about this further this afternoon, the BDCP Effects Analysis Review. Of course, one of the most important functions that the Delta Science Program does is this coordinates the independent review process of some of the very difficult topics. And we do that through reviews of documents. We also, under some circumstances, like the State Board I'll talk about in a moment, you convene expert workshops where we bring in insiders and outsiders to address very specific questions. So the effects analysis review is really one of the key points of BDCP. If you're going to create a lot of additional habitat, what are the effects between the flows and the benefits of the habitat? And the effects analysis is actually extremely broad. I won't go into all of that now. The science program has been asked to conduct a series of these reviews, so it isn't just a one-stop deal. I know the ISB has been following this very closely. This is actually the third of a series of reviews on the effects analysis. So a few important dates here. The BDCP draft will be released for public review on December the 13th. On December the 18th, trying to be very efficient of the ISB's time, the BDCP leadership team has agreed to come and give a public briefing to let you know you've taken a look at the administrative draft, to have just an idea of the scope of the work and the task, the enormity of the task in front of you. And so David Zippen and the leadership of the BDCP will come and give a briefing on primarily the changes that have occurred between the draft which you had reviewed earlier and what to look for in the public version. There won't be an opportunity for public comment during that. It's purely a briefing. It's information. It's an informational item. It's there to try and disseminate to folks. And then the effects panel themselves, and I should have said that this panel has been the same throughout all three reviews, so there's now a lot of in-depth experience there in the panel. And this will occur on January the 28th and 29th. In the written material there were two possible dates. That's now being confirmed. And, of course, during that time for members of the public, that there's plenty of opportunity during that for you to make your comments. Okay, are there any questions on that item? The other thing, I'll just mention this very briefly. Certainly for the Council, I had given you advance warning that we would be conducting a review, which is the fourth annual review of the long-term operations of the biological opinions. What National Marine Fisheries Service and US Fish and Wildlife Service has asked of the science program is to review their reasonable and prudent alternatives, the RPAs. And these reviews vary from year to year. It's a retrospective of the water operations in that previous year. What did the monitoring, what did the science tell us about certain topics? And that's part of it. And then the second thing is what lessons have been learned from that past year that could be carried forward into future operations. Obviously, this is a huge task, and so what NIMFS and Fish and Wildlife Service do is each year the questions that they ask, depending on what sort of water year it was, what they learned from the previous review, the actual topic of the questions does vary from year to year. That panel met on November the 6th to the 7th. We're expecting their full report in December, and we hope that would be available so I can report back to the Council in your December meeting in a lot of detail, because I know there's a lot of interest on that topic. If you're interested, they're early thoughts, so we asked the panel to come back after they've reflected on the PowerPoints that they've received. This is what they think they heard. It's an opportunity for both the agencies, the people that gave the presentations, and members of the public to make comments about their preliminary findings. So they are preliminary. They may well refine based on some of the feedback that they heard, but those comments are out on our webpage. But just one interesting comment that I think in the recommendations is that the panel acknowledged that this is potentially going to be a very dry year. And they said, just because it's a dry year you should be out there doing science, because it's not just putting more water in the system, but when you stress it with less water, there are really great research and science opportunities here. You don't lose your opportunity. So it will be interesting to see in their full report some of their thoughts about how we can capitalize on this if it is indeed an extreme year from the dry perspective. Are there any comments on that? If not, I will go to the next.
Peter?
Thank you.
Yeah, I might just comment on your last point. I think the history of ecology has always been to look in normal places and normal years. And I think that a subset of ecologists, at least, have come to realize that those are the most uninformative situations in which you can possibly do a study. That the best situations are when a system is really stressed, too much or too little. So I think that's simply by way of reinforcing the value of trying to get out there when you have unusual circumstances to mobilize the science and find out what you can, because you're going to find out a lot more about the system under those conditions.
Thank you, Dr. Wings. Okay, just a couple of other very quick items here just for your future information. The State Board workshops, which we've been asked to conduct, these are more, not so much a review, but exploratory to answer very specific questions. I should also say that the way we structure these, we have guidelines, of course, that probably everyone here in the room, and certainly ISB have weighed in on the guidelines. It's one of the appendices in the science plan itself. And within those guidelines, we're using some of these workshops to experiment a little bit with the format. Because I think, as you know, when you sit on these panels, you tend to show up, you get certainly advanced materials, it's then death by PowerPoint for a day and a half. You're struggling to respond to that information. So we're looking at innovative ways to get information out to the panel members in a way that is very efficient of their time. And then trying to use the workshops more as a chance for dialogue around the science itself. So I think the details aren't quite worked out, but I think you'll see some very nice innovations, and you're taking that little bit of extra time with some of the feedback we got on that, I think is going to be very worthwhile. The last thing I'll just mention, and this sort of happened at very short notice, I was asked to actually be a fill-in to the National Science Foundation experimental program to stimulate competitive research, which is the program that looks at distributing research throughout the US. How do you link the research to economic development to maintain American competitiveness? And unfortunately, I was asked to be a late fill-in for someone who was taken ill on the topic of building research networks. So it was a great opportunity to talk partly about what we're doing here. And the science plan had just been received, and I think that some of the feedback that we got, people say, boy, this is really something quite special. Keep us informed of what's going on. Just as a lighter note, it was one of the most extraordinary meetings I've ever been to, because it took place in Nashville, Tennessee, extremely well organized, but it was exactly over the time of the Country Music Awards. And it was all in the same hotel. and you really couldn't tell the difference between the university professors and some of the...
Oh, let's pause and discuss that.
No, but actually it was really quite entertaining to be rubbing shoulders.
Did you wear boots and a cowboy hat during the conference?
Actually, I didn't. I think my tastes are more towards opera than country music. But it was, the whole meeting actually was very, very well done. And that's actually on the NSF webpage. If anyone is interested, you can actually see the presentations there, including the one that I gave. So, if there are no questions, the last thing we do here, maybe for the Independent Science Board, we'll ask Emily Mortazavi, who is one of our state fellows. If you recall, we have these two programs, Science Fellows, which go through CGLA, and then the State Fellows program. And Emily is getting close to the end of her year. We've had 2 wonderful State Fellows this year. And Emily, at the request of the Council, just give us a litmus test, what's going on in terms of your water. And Emily's been doing a great job for many months now of providing a summary of key indicators that give an idea and can help the Council anticipate what some of the questions that may be coming up over the next few months. So, Emily.